Story number 1, Interview Room 5. I arrived at the Montana Safe House on the evening of November 14th to relieve Deputy Marshal Connors, who briefed me on Edward Halston's condition and cooperativeness. Halston was a mid-level accountant for a construction firm with ties to organized crime, and his testimony would dismantle a racketeering operation spanning 3 states. He sat in the kitchen when I introduced myself, thin-faced and alert, but with the kind of exhaustion that sleep alone cannot fix. He told me he had not slept in 3 nights. He said the nightmares were about the room itself. The bedroom where he was staying, the one with the single window facing the tree line. He did not describe the nightmares in detail. He only said they were the same each time, and he had stopped trying to sleep because waking was preferable. I reviewed the house protocols. The safe house was a standard federal facility, reinforced doors, monitored windows, a perimeter alarm, 2 bedrooms, kitchen, common area. I took the upstairs room. Halston took the downstairs. I told him rest was essential before trial testimony, and that I would monitor the house while he attempted to sleep. At 2:17 in the morning on the first night, I heard him speaking. The voice was clear, measured, coming from the direction of his bedroom. I checked the door monitor. The thermal imaging showed him in bed, still, motionless. His lips were not moving. The voice continued for approximately 4 minutes, then stopped. I made a note in the log and did not wake him. The second night, the voice returned at 1:53 in the morning. This time I stood outside his door and listened. The voice was speaking about court dates and financial transfers. Halston remained asleep according to the monitor. I could see his chest rising and falling. His mouth was closed. I opened the door. The voice stopped. Halston did not wake. I closed the door and returned to my room. On the third night, I brought a recording device. The voice began at 2:04 in the morning. It was speaking about a man named Raymond Voss. It mentioned dates from a trial in 2019. It referenced specific amounts of money that Halston had never mentioned to me. I asked a question aloud. The voice answered. It answered accurately. It answered in real time. I called my supervisor at 3:27 in the morning. Supervisor Reeves instructed me to maintain the witness, continue monitoring, and avoid any written documentation beyond standard log entries. He said a psych evaluator would arrive within 48 hours. He said to keep the house secure and not to discuss the matter with Halston. The voice identified itself on the 4th night. It said it was Raymond Voss. It said Halston had testified against it in 2019. It said Halston's testimony had resulted in a conviction. It said it had died in federal custody in 2020. I did not respond. I recorded the statement. On the 5th morning, Halston woke and came upstairs for coffee. He seemed rested. I asked him how he had slept. He said better. I mentioned that I had heard him speaking during the night. He looked at me without recognition and said he had not spoken. He said I must have been dreaming. He said I should get more sleep. I attempted to reference specific statements the voice had made. Halston became agitated. He said I was being strange. He said I was making things up. He said he did not know anyone named Raymond Voss. He said if I continued talking about it, he would request a different marshal. The psych evaluator, Dr. Sarah Chen, arrived on the afternoon of the 5th day. She conducted a standard mental status examination with Halston. It took approximately 40 minutes. She reviewed his medical history, asked him about sleep, mood, and stress levels. She made notes. She declared him fit for trial testimony. She did not mention my report. Her written assessment contained no reference to the incidents I had described to Supervisor Reeves. It was a standard clearance form with checkboxes marked and her signature at the bottom. Halston testified on November 19th. His testimony was coherent and detailed. The prosecution used his account to establish the financial structure of the organization. The defense did not challenge his credibility. The trial concluded with a conviction. Halston entered the witness protection program on November 21st. I was reassigned to district operations on November 22nd. Supervisor Reeves sent a memo instructing me to destroy all recordings from the safe house and to file no supplemental reports regarding the assignment. The recordings were deleted. The safe house returned to standard operational status. The incident was archived under case closure protocols and marked for restricted access. I have not been reassigned to witness protection duty since that November. Story number 2, Logging Road 12. I arrived at the Logging Road turnoff at 0600. The gate was locked. The access road ran north through dense second growth Douglas fir, and the morning was still dark enough that my headlamp cut a clean line through the mist. I was there to follow up on a poaching complaint filed 2 weeks prior by a contract timber cruiser named David Reeves. The report had come in through the standard channel, delayed, as they often are in unincorporated areas where cell service is inconsistent and people assume someone else has already called it in. Reeves was waiting at the gate. He was a thin man in his 50s, weathered in the way that comes from spending seasons in the field. He had a thermos of coffee and a map marked with a red X. He told me he had found an elk carcass during a timber cruise approximately 1.3 miles up the old logging track. He said the animal had been dead for some time, maybe 2 to 3 weeks based on the decomposition, but something about it was wrong. He used that word twice. Wrong. I asked him to be specific. He said the cuts were wrong. Not the cuts a hunter makes, not the cuts a predator makes. The ribcage had been opened in a way he couldn't explain. The sternum was separated cleanly. The organs were gone. There were no bullet wounds, no broadhead entry, no signs of trap damage or snare marks. Just the carcass, opened and emptied. We hiked in. The trail was overgrown but passable. The morning was quiet. I documented the route and the time of entry in my field log. At 1.3 miles, we found the site. The elk was a bull, probably 4 or 5 years old. The carcass was in an advanced state of decomposition. The hide was slipping. The exposed muscle tissue had darkened and begun to liquefy. The smell was what you would expect. But Reeves was right about the opening. The ribcage had been separated with precision. The sternum was removed. The cavity was empty. There was no evidence of scavenging, no tooth marks on the bone, no scattered remains, no tracks in the soft earth around the body. I established a basic perimeter using flagging tape and began standard evidence collection. I photographed the carcass from multiple angles. I checked for bullet holes, for any sign of projectile entry. I found nothing. I was taking soil samples when Reeves told me he was going back to the truck. He said he would wait at the trailhead. I told him to remain in the perimeter. He said he needed to make a call and walked out anyway. I noted the time and the irregularity in my log, but I continued the work. Protocol allowed for solo investigation in cases where a witness became unreliable. 40 minutes later, while I was still documenting the site, the carcass moved. It was not a dramatic movement. The ribcage contracted slightly, as if the animal was breathing. Then it expanded. The movement was slow and deliberate. I was standing approximately 4 meters from the remains. I maintained visual contact. The movement stopped. The carcass was now positioned differently than it had been 5 minutes prior. The left side, which had been facing upward, was now angled toward the south. The legs had shifted. The head had turned. I checked for wind. There was no wind. I checked for settling. The ground was stable. I waited. Over the next 30 minutes, the carcass repositioned itself twice more. Each time, the movement was slow and coordinated, as if something inside the body was rearranging itself. Each time, I documented what I observed in my log. Each time, I remained in place. At that point, I made a decision. I collected my equipment. I secured the perimeter flags. I returned to the vehicle. Reeves was not at the truck. His truck was parked at the gate with the keys in the ignition and the driver's side door open. I waited for 40 minutes. I called his cell phone. The call went to voicemail. I called the county dispatcher and reported that a witness had become unaccounted for at a remote site. I provided his vehicle information and his last known location. The dispatcher instructed me to remain on scene and await backup. Backup arrived at 9:40, 5 in the morning. 2 officers from the county sheriff's office. I briefed them on the situation. I gave them my field log and my photographs. I described the condition of the carcass. I described the movements I had observed. I did not use the word impossible. I used the word irregular. The officers hiked in with me. We reached the site at 10:23. The carcass was in the original position. The rib cage was closed. The sternum was in place. The cavity was sealed. There was no evidence of disturbance since I had left. The officers photographed the site. They collected their own samples. They found nothing unusual. One of them asked me if I was certain about what I had seen. I told him I had documented it in real time. He nodded and said nothing else. We returned to the vehicles at 11 o'clock. Reeves' truck was still there, still empty, still with the keys in the ignition. The officers called in another unit to secure the vehicle. I was instructed to return to the field office and file a complete report. I filed the report the next day. I cited inconclusive evidence. I recommended the area for seasonal closure due to unstable terrain conditions and the disappearance of a witness. I noted that the poaching complaint could not be substantiated. I recommended the case be transferred to federal jurisdiction given the disappearance. The case was transferred within 72 hours. My report was reclassified to restricted access. I was reassigned to administrative duties for the remainder of the quarter. Reeves was listed as a missing person, but the search was called off after 2 weeks. No body was found. No explanation was offered. The incident file was archived in 2024. I was told not to discuss it outside of official channels. I was told that my reassignment was temporary. It was not temporary. I have remained in administrative status for 18 months. I no longer investigate field complaints. I process paperwork. I attend meetings. I do not return to that road. The file is closed. Story number 3, Deposition Archive. I was brought in on a contract basis to digitize the civil case records held in the basement archive of the county courthouse in central Pennsylvania. My background is in information management and archival preservation, and I had completed similar projects for 3 other municipalities in the region. The work was straightforward photograph and scan documents from 1870 through 1945, organize the digital files by case number and date, and deliver everything on external drives with a full inventory report. I worked alone during evening hours after the courthouse closed at 5 o'clock. The basement was climate controlled and reasonably well lit, though the fluorescent panels hummed constantly and cast everything in a flat, colorless tone. The archive occupied roughly half the basement space, organized into rows of metal filing cabinets arranged by decade. I had been given a detailed inventory manifest on my first day, which listed every cabinet, the number of folders within it, and the date ranges it contained. On my fourth night, around 8 o'clock, I was working through the 1920s section when I noticed a cabinet in the back corner that was not on my manifest. It was the same model as the others, painted the same institutional gray, and it contained approximately 200 case folders with proper indexing labels. The folders were arranged chronologically, and the labels followed the standard format I had seen throughout the archive. The dates on these folders ranged from 1874 to 1944. I checked my manifest 3 times. The cabinet simply was not listed. I walked the perimeter of the archive and counted the cabinets against my inventory. The numbers did not match. I was off by 1 cabinet, and it was the one in the corner. I photographed the cabinet from multiple angles, took a close-up of the label on the first folder, and made a note of its position relative to the surrounding units. I intended to include this discrepancy in my weekly progress report to my supervisor. The next morning, I sent an email describing the unlisted cabinet and attached the photographs. My supervisor, a woman named Patricia Henning, who worked for the County Records Department, responded within an hour. She said she would look into it and told me to continue with my assigned work in the meantime. I should scan the materials from the listed cabinets and not worry about the discrepancy yet. I returned that evening and decided to begin digitizing the contents of the unlisted cabinet while I waited for clarification. I set up my scanner on the work table I had positioned near the cabinet and began pulling folders. The first case was dated 1874. The plaintiff was listed as Eleanor Voss. The defendant was a property owner in the same county. The case involved a boundary dispute. The documentation was typical for that era: handwritten notations, property descriptions, witness statements. I scanned the first page. The scanner processed it normally and saved the image file. I scanned the second page. The scanner produced a hardware error code I had not encountered before. The error message was brief and did not suggest a solution. I tried again. The same error appeared. I checked the scanner's connection, restarted the device, and attempted the scan once more. The error persisted. I moved to the next folder. The plaintiff was again Eleanor Voss. The case was dated 1891. I tried to scan the first page. The same hardware error. I continued through several more folders, all with the same plaintiff name, all producing the same error. Eleanor Voss appeared as the plaintiff in cases spanning from 1874 to 1944. I found no death record, no notation of corporate status, no indication of how one person could initiate civil suits across 7 decades. I attempted manual photography instead. I used my personal phone and also the departmental camera I had been issued. I photographed pages from 3 different folders under various lighting conditions. When I reviewed the images later, the pages appeared completely blank. No text was visible, no handwriting, no marks of any kind. The photographs showed only the paper itself, blank white space. I contacted Patricia Henning again. I described the scanning errors and the photographic anomaly. I did not mention the implausibility of the plaintiff's continuity across 70 years. I kept my report factual and limited to the technical problems. Patricia called me that evening. She said to exclude the cabinet from my project scope entirely. She said it was likely a cataloging error from decades past, and that the cabinet might contain materials that had not been properly assessed for inclusion in the digitization project. She instructed me to make no mention of the cabinet in my official documentation. She said this was a routine precaution when archival inconsistencies were discovered. I was to continue with the listed materials and complete my contract as planned. I agreed and ended the call. On my 6th night, I arrived at the archive at 6:30 in the evening. The basement door was locked from the inside, as it always was when I was working alone. I unlocked it with my key card and secured it behind me. I walked to my workstation and stopped. The unlisted cabinet was no longer in the back corner. It was positioned 3 rows forward, between 2 listed cabinets in the 1930s section. I checked the basement door. It remained locked. I had been alone in the archive for the entire day. I moved the cabinet back to the corner where it had been. I did not photograph this. I did not contact Patricia. The following evening, the cabinet was in a different location again. It was now in the 19-teens section, closer to the front of the archive. I moved it back to the corner. On my 8th night, the cabinet was gone. I searched the entire basement. I checked every row, every corner, every storage closet. The cabinet was not there. The space where it had been was empty. I checked my inventory manifest. The numbers were now correct. The manifest showed no gap in the cabinet sequence. It was as if the cabinet had never existed in the archive at all. I completed the digitization of all listed materials over the next 2 weeks. My work was finished ahead of schedule. Patricia Henning called to congratulate me on the early completion and informed me that the county would be paying the performance bonus specified in my contract. She asked me to come to her office to finalize the paperwork. When I arrived, she had prepared an amended non-disclosure agreement for me to sign. The amendment included a clause regarding archival inconsistencies and the protocols for handling materials that fell outside the scope of standard cataloging procedures. I did not recall this clause from the original agreement I had signed. Patricia explained that it was standard language for all county projects and that I must have overlooked it initially. I signed the amendment without reading it fully. The digitization project is now closed. The files have been delivered and archived. My contract is complete. The cabinet is not listed in any official record of the courthouse archive.